Please, who's first?
Hi, I'm Teresa Gillespie from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. This question is for Dr. Kinyanju.
Just say some.
Okay. First, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate that. Second, you made the comment in your presentation that many of the clinical trials, or most of them, are driven by local needs and input. And what you described sounds very much like the model of community-based participatory research, which certainly in the United States is not the model for therapeutic clinical trials. And so I just wondered if that is very much the model from your experience, and if you could comment on how others might learn from that model.
Yeah. So as I indicated, I think the traditional model, and which I think is still happening, unfortunately, in many places, is that it's driven from elsewhere. And my comment was that for us, because we have integrated clinical trials as part of a larger research system, we are able to address local questions which you would really struggle to think about if you are not on the ground. So I'm not pretending that we have this amazing community participatory driven. What I meant is that we're able to see, for example, the examples giving is, until you have very good clinical surveillance system that can pick up the children that are dying in the first 3 hours of coming to hospital, you'll be thinking about how do you treat malaria. You'll be working towards developing a malaria drug, but actually by realizing that because you're locally placed that the kids will die in 3 hours, you realize that it's not a parasitological treatment that is really lacking. It's something else completely. You need to correct metabolic derangement that the children have by the time they come to hospital. So you'll start looking at a completely different type of a clinical trial that will be almost impossible to do if you are doing in the best advanced molecular biology or chemistry lab somewhere else. That's not to say the others are not needed. It's just to say that there are questions which are really hard to answer unless you develop the local research capacity. And to ask those questions, you need that capacity.
This question is for Natalie. I want to ask, if we now think the phase 3 of the clinical trial, let's say cardiovascular disease or diabetes, usually we compare the outcome with existing therapy. I wonder for the neglected disease, we haven't optimized existing therapies for known drugs. So how can you say that they are superior than existing one?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. And indeed, sometimes you have to compare with not the optimal drug. That being said, in the Helsinki Declaration, it is made very clear that you have to use in comparison the standard of care. And in fact, we've had some discussions sometimes, not for phase 3, but for phase 2, whether or not we could use placebo when we considered that looking at superiority over placebo in a non-debilitating and severe disease could provide a better answer than using a drug which is standard of care but not very good and possibly toxic. And sometimes we have these type of questions even for phase 2. But I would say for phase 3, we work with what we have, and we do conduct non-inferiority trials with existing treatments. And these treatments, if you remember what I said, it is striking that sometimes you have no treatments, and sometimes you have you don't even know what is the efficacy of the treatments, like in chronic Chagas disease. We now know, but we didn't know, I would say a few years back, it wasn't solid evidence. So that makes it difficult. But when you have these drugs, like the drugs we have for sleeping sickness, of visceral leishmaniasis, efficacy is really high of the treatments. It's about 93, 94%. And this is what makes the non-inferiority and the calculation of the sample size or of the margin of non-inferiority not very easy to determine, and requires a high number of patients. But it's feasible. This is what you need to do. And then in your trial, you will look at safety, and you will also consider in the outcome value of the product not only the efficacy, but everything else that Sam also mentioned in terms of access to patients. How much will it increase the possibility of patients to be treated with something that works and that is safe. So a number of things are captured into your design that you still have to work according to the rules. But this is why I was saying that it is extremely important, I think, to work hand in hand or as close as possible with the regulators so they understand your challenges and so that you don't end up with a superb clinical development plan that will never end. So, it's a case-by-case story, but your question is a very tricky one we have to work with every day.
Still three questions to go. Luis?
For the drink.
So this is a question for you, Ole.
Oh, dear.
Is there any plans in place to coordinate activities between the EDCTP2 activities initiative and the Gates-sponsored trial of the PPPs? Because I can envisage easily that there could be some things duplicated or that could benefit from this kind of close collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's a good question in the sense that we talk about partnerships, but we should not just talk about partnerships between researchers, but also between funders. And we have a lot of informal contacts with the larger funders, both the Gates Foundation, for example, and also the Wellcome Trust and a number of other funders. So I think we are actually quite well informed with what each other are doing. The problem in many cases, I think, is each organization have their own rules, their own procedures, which sometimes make it difficult and challenging to actually meet. But that is some of the things that I think indeed we should work on and become better as a community of funders to actually try to find ways how we can fund trials via different mechanisms, but in such a way that we don't duplicate, but try to synergize. So I think we are quite aware of it, and I think there's an increasing interest, I feel that, from other funders as well. I think leverage is the key word. Everybody's looking for collaboration and leverage so that we synergize with each other. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Marianne from the NTD, and I just wanted to make a comment which is not entirely directly connected to clinical trials, but is in a roundabout manner of relevance. I just wanted to pick up on a comment that was made by one of the delegates here, and I would like at the same time to salute Sam, who has come as the delegate who's traveled 25 hours, and thank you and welcome. And just to comment a little bit that as a science and an NTD community, we should definitely be aware of the barriers which exist to participating maybe acutely in the scientific meetings, and perhaps just be quite aware in general of the barriers that exist. And at the same time, as we've been seeing throughout the day, seeing all these fantastic open source and collaborative initiatives, and also in Trudy Lang's presentation, which really showed that perhaps even without being able to resolve all these barriers, they might just become obsolete anyway, given the new communication and the new cooperation and collaboration tools that we have. And the barriers I'm referring to are things like travel and distance, or budget, sometimes even language. I mean, most of the meetings are in English, and not everybody wants to or chooses to have English as their first language. So I just wanted to finish on a positive note on that, and just perhaps get your thoughts regarding this. We do have a lot of collaboration with health research centers in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique, in Angola. We promote their work and so forth, and we're quite happy to share a lot of information remotely, and occasionally meet. We met in Lisbon. We had an event in Portuguese, actually, looking at health research in Lusophone African countries. So, just wanting to comment on that, and also be a little bit upbeat on this.
No, thank you very much. Having said that I was the only one from, in this case. It doesn't mean that there isn't work going on in Africa. I think there's quite some really good research centers in Africa that you can name, whether it's Mozambique, whether it's in Tanzania, Ifakara, whether it's in Ghana, the Dodo and Avrongo and Kintapo, or whether it's in Mali, or of course South Africa and the northern African countries we'll also have. So I think part of this is also about just maybe people not being aware that these things are happening. At individual levels, you may be aware, so it may be that London School collaborates with Tanzania, and Oxford collaborates with Kilifi because a lot of the people in Oxford were from Kilifi, or NIH collaborates with MRTC in Mali, or something like that. And the Lusophone countries, of course, will collaborate with Barcelona and places like that, University of Barcelona. But I think the important thing is there's a whole group of people who are not aware of it. So we have people from pharma who may not have been aware of all these places that are happening. I know GSK is very aware because they've been running things like RTSS. And I think it's all about networking and spreading this sort of, if you like, networking information and the information that you come from here, so that people become more and more aware of each other. People become aware that there are sites, there are centers in the developing countries that are actual fully fledged research centers with capacity and with ability, and all they need to do is go and collaborate with them on equal terms, rather than the idea that you're going down to take a clinical trial to a site. So although I did talk about the big gap that there still is in terms of capacity, nonetheless I would also like to talk about the gap that there is in awareness that actually there is capacity to a certain extent.
Also another gap. I don't know what's your experience, but moving researchers from one country to another is becoming increasingly difficult. And talking from experience here, the Open Lab Foundation, it's so complicated. It takes us an average of 6 to 8 months, sometimes even more, if we want to move a researcher from sub-Saharan Africa to a European country. It's not hard to imagine that probably in the US is a similar situation. And I was wondering if, as a community and having somebody here, well, not representing the EC anymore, I understand, it's an autonomous organization, but I think we should do something about this because, yes, there's a lot of exchange of information, there's fluid relationships between many organizations, but at the end of the day, moving researchers is a big part of that, and it's definitely becoming a rate limiting step for science.
You could, of course, also move the research, not necessarily the researchers.
That's okay, but in many instances, that's the best way to use research, if having people, from 2 different labs sharing space and sharing ideas in a continuous manner. So at least that's the spirit of the Open Lab. And when it does happen, eventually we see progress being made. So.
Yes, just a comment from me, Martina Glieber, Fondation Mérieux. And I also wanted to thank very much the colleague from Cambridge for coming here. And of course, we would have been happy to see more African participants, but we understand that that's not so easy. But I would like to just say that, as I mentioned this morning, we are supporting the African capacity building within the European Foundation Initiative for African Research into NTDs. And we trained now more than 30 postdoctoral African researchers, also from Cambridge and elsewhere. And now these students, let's say these researchers, have expressed the need and the wish to become better networked and organized themselves within Africa, and suggested the creation of an African research network for NTDs. And so we are starting discussions about that with other colleagues, because as Ole said, we have to get better organized with funding institutions and to create collaborations and partnerships to make it easier also for the African researchers to access funding and so on. So I think it's important to help this community of African researchers on NTD to better work, to better collaborate within Africa, but also with European institutes, and also maybe to make some advocacy for the need to have research on neglected tropical diseases and to strengthen capacities in Africa for that. So the organizers said there is a need for creating collaborations and partnerships, and if some of you are interested in knowing more about what the African researchers express as needs for us, for this African network, we would be happy to work together with you on that.
Thank you very much.
I have one question actually for Paul. On when you're doing your leprosy work, are you in any way networking or collaborating with other people in the mycobacterial community, so in the TB field and the Buruli ulcer field, considering that there are many similarities?
Yeah, certainly. Well, we are supporting a lot of work in Buruli ulcer, so there's a lot of synergy, not only in the treatment, but also in the whole issue of morbidity management. And in fact, that is one area in which we are trying to integrate with a broader group of the NTDs, in particular lymphatic filariasis. So both morbidity management and then also early diagnosis of cases that have some skin manifestations, so lymphatic filariasis and leishmaniasis, together with leprosy and Buruli ulcer. So that is still early, but they're very definite attempts to integrate across those diseases. And with TB, there's a much older partnership. So in the 1990s, there were a lot of combined leprosy and TB programs. And in some ways, that has become less at the moment, but there's more integration with the management of complications now.
Any last questions? Otherwise, I think we are well done. Should we, considering that we have still managed to survive until now, give a hand for the panelists and yourself as well?